Good evening and welcome to the Power of Connection, a Powered by PechaKucha event hosted by the UBC Sauder School of Business and Peter A. Allard School of Law. My name is Frankie Cena and I'm pleased to be your virtual MC for the evening. I graduated from the UBC Sauder School of Business in 2013 and I am the founding director of Fostering Debate Talent Academy, one of the first full-fledged public speaking and debate academies in the world. And this year I was named one of BC's 30 under 30. I've used my public speaking experience on programs such as the Netflix series Sing On, the Miss World Beauty Pageant, and even Canada's Smartest Person. I'm also an alumnus of this PechaKucha series I presented back in 2016 on the theme of everyday superheroes. So I know how much work the presenters have put into tonight's presentations. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UBC Vancouver is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. For those of you joining from places near and far, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. I'm greeting you from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Tonight's topic is the power of connection. And in an age of distance, connections have never been more important. I am so pleased that you've connected with us virtually this evening, and I cannot wait to share with you these exciting and inspiring presentations. Now, the music you enjoyed while settling in this evening was curated and played by Cindy Sue, one of our talented presenters this evening. Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to tell you about the format for this evening because it's very unique. All of the presentations will be done in the PechaKucha style. For those of you who aren't familiar with this format, each speaker will present using 20 slides timed at exactly 20 seconds each. PechaKucha, which is Japanese for chit-chat, was developed by architects in Japan as a way to streamline long design presentations and share ideas in a very simple but visual way. The format will be fast and furious and a whole lot of fun. After the presentations, I'll be hosting a Q&A using Slido. Now, on to our first speaker, Christina Meng. Christina is a customer advocacy programs manager at Slack, based in San Francisco, California. And even though she is currently based in San Fran, Christina is a proud Vancouverite who will always cheer for the Canucks over the Sharks. She graduated from McGill University with a Bachelor of Science in 2010 and completed her Master of Management at the Sauder School of Business in 2013. Christina has been working at Slack for the past 6 years. A natural-born talker, it's no surprise that she ended up working in the collaboration and communication space. She is passionate about effective communication and collaboration and works with organizations every day to help them improve the way they work. Outside of work, she loves musical theater, taking Barry's boot camp classes, skiing, and hanging out with her rescue pup, Wally. Christina joins us tonight from San Francisco. Over to you, Christina.
I'll never forget one thing my mom always said to me as a kid. Be sure to always help your friends and don't be afraid to ask them for help too, because you will need it one day. As a kid, I also remember thinking, why on earth would I ever ask my friends for anything except to play pogs with me at recess? Growing up, I had a lot of interests. Some might call it well-rounded. Most called it a lack of direction. So when it came time to think about what I wanted my career to be, it was a struggle to say the least. Since a ballet dancer, public speaker, Broadway singer, film editor, sports reporter, lawyer, doctor, dog trainer isn't actually a job, I decided I wanted to be the next best thing. I decided I wanted to be a dentist. So off I went to study science at McGill University. I was a straight A student in high school, except for PE, the only grade my immigrant parents didn't care about, and I assumed I had this in the bag. Well, I failed my first midterm and realized my classmates had deep reasons for wanting to get into medicine that put my reasoning, wanting to be the dentist for the Vancouver Canucks, to shame. I had grown up performing and I love storytelling, so I decided to dip my toe in the wonderful world of journalism. I started working at CTV as an intern during the summer after first year, and soon after I started doing some hosting for Novus TV. I loved it, but I couldn't see myself making an entire career out of it, so it stayed my side hustle for over 10 years. back to the drawing board I went. Right now, you're probably all wondering, who is this woman and why on earth did they ask her to speak? She is all over the place. Believe me, I know, I've heard it all before. I graduated from McGill with my Bachelor of Science, and I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Just to get my parents off my back, I decided to write my MCAT, LSAT, and GMAT all in one summer. Not something I would recommend to anyone. My undergrad grades were not great, to say the least. You could tell I was spending more time playing beer pong than doing my lab write-ups, and I did not score as high as I needed to on my LSATs or MCATs to make up for that. I did apply to UBC Law, got rejected very quickly, but ended up scoring well on my GMAT, so by default was about to embark upon a career in business, whatever that meant. I remember my first day of my Master of Management at Sauder. We were told to take a good look around the room at everyone. We were told that this is now our primary network, people we can lean on, a group that will support each other, and your primary source for finding referrals and getting jobs. Suddenly, what my mom said about not being afraid to ask people for help started to have some real life backing behind it. I went into my MM actually with a clear career path in mind for the first time. I wanted to work in marketing for a media or news company. But when it came time for graduation, no media companies were hiring, so I had to pivot once again. Through a referral from one of my MM classmates, I ended up taking on an inside sales role at Vision Critical, a Vancouver-based market research tech company. I used to make fun of my brother for reading computer magazines. I had no interest in tech and didn't know anything about it. But I'll let you in on a secret. You don't actually have to know anything about tech in order to sell it. Okay, I'm joking. But it turns out it was a great fit for me. When it came time to look for a new job, I took my mom's advice, reached out to my network to find some leads, and I'm so happy that I did. One of my friends was reading Van City Buzz, a Vancouver-based blog that I think is now called Daily Hive, and stumbled across a job posting for a company called Slack. She sent it to me because she knew I was looking for a job. I had never heard of Slack. It hadn't taken off yet, so after a quick Google search, it seemed like a fun tool, kind of like WhatsApp, and I used WhatsApp, so I went for it and applied. January 13th, 2015 was my first day as an account manager at Slack. I was employee number 82, and my first task was setting up my own monitor out of the box. It was a true startup, but I loved it. Not only was everyone so humble and nice, but also the tool itself allowed me to connect with my coworkers in a new way. What stood out to me the most was how connected our users felt to the tool. No joke, Slack was getting multiple proposals on Twitter a month. I learned my sales style very quickly. I was a relationship builder, which wasn't always seen as a positive in sales, but I'm a very open book. I have an innate desire and curiosity about people, and I love finding common ground with others. Thanks to my side hustle in journalism, I had also gotten very good at asking questions and learning about people. So for me, relationship selling came naturally. I learned early on to play to my strengths. My strength was building strong relationships. So when Slack rolled out a customer success team, it was a no-brainer for me to join. A very, very tech title, customer success is all about managing the post-sale relationship with a customer, really understanding how their business works and partnering with them to ensure they're getting the most value out of their investment. So in 2017, I officially became a Slack CSM. We took our calls at our desks to allow for open learning, and boy, did I feel sorry for those around me. I project when I speak, and my entire team, including my director, would laugh and shush me as I asked an SVP at 21st Century Fox about a tennis game over the weekend. You see, I genuinely cared, and I genuinely believe this instilled a sense of trust in me, which was key in my role. Feedback from my managers was always excellent at relationship building. So again, I played to my strengths and carved out a new role for myself running our customer advocacy programs. In February, I started managing our Global Champion Network, a community of Slack advocates across over 1,000 different organizations. I ensure they stay engaged with Slack through special events, custom content, and building strong relationships with their champions. Perfect role for me. That was February. I had run one major champion event that was a huge success and was planning on taking it on the road, but then COVID hit. A true extrovert, a mandatory lockdown took a serious toll on my mental health. I've suffered from anxiety disorder and panic attacks for years, and after putting in a lot of work through therapy, I managed to get it under control. But during lockdown, my anxiety reared its ugly head once again. There was about a week where I couldn't get out of bed. My usual coping mechanisms of seeing my family and friends was no longer an option, so I had to turn to the next best thing, my virtual communities. It was because of Slack and these communities that I didn't feel alone. We had channels to discuss very various working from home strategies, and the feeling of support through conversations in Slack were truly inspirational. The support I felt through Slack with my coworkers inspired me to bring the same to our champion community. I started asking them to share stories about how they're working from home and brought an element of interactivity to every virtual event I was planning. The feedback was so positive, and I learned some very heartwarming stories, like how some parents at one organization were using Slack to run virtual story times for their kids in order to help each other with childcare. I started my career and life not understanding the importance of connection. I felt like asking my friends for help was a way of using them, but this couldn't be further from the truth. As I got older and wiser, I learned about the importance of connection, of building a strong network, and these relationships are 100% what got me to where I am now, in my dream role with a company that I love, with various networks of people to reach out to, lean on, and provide support to in return. It was through my connection to my cohort that I got into tech. It was through a connection with a high school friend that I found Slack. It was through connections with my community that I was able to get a better grasp on my mental health. And it was through all of these connections that gave me direction. So I'm not afraid to admit it now. Mom, I should have listened to you earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. What a thoughtful, thorough overview of your experience. I can totally relate to using technology to connect. I mean, how else would we be here tonight? Our next speaker is Jaden Bork. Jaden is Slavi Dene, Cree, Métis, and Canadian. Born in Alberta and lived in Alberta and Saskatchewan before him and his family settled to the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. Jaden completed his undergraduate degree at Vancouver Island University and subsequently relocated to Vancouver area to attend law school. He's a recent graduate of the Allard School of Law and a proud alumnus of the school's Indigenous Legal Studies program. Upon completion of his law degree, Jaden achieved a specialization in Aboriginal law, and he currently has the distinct pleasure of being an articling student with the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic. Jaden is intent on practicing Aboriginal law and is focused on the amelioration of Indigenous peoples and the crucial role that the law has in affecting this change. Please welcome Jaden.
When I was approached to speak, I felt a little overwhelmed and wondered what could be meritorious about my story. Then it dawned on me, my family has an incredible story. And this is where my story begins. This is my mom, Alana, in Peace River, Alberta, at around the age of 14 when she would have met my dad. The lion's share of what I know about connection comes from this incredible lady. My story also begins here with my dad, Doug, pictured here at about the age of 16 in Peace River at approximately the time he would have met my mom. At this age, he was deeply ashamed of his indigeneity, and he was trying to make it as a young white man in Alberta, despite the betrayal of his phenotypic expression. The rest of what I know about connection comes from my dad. This is the genesis of who I am and how I would eventually define myself as a man and an Indigenous person. My parents had a connection which transcended the division of settler society and the Indigenous population. My mom taught my dad to celebrate who he was. However, the consequences of their miscegenation were not lost on my parents. Here, in a rare event, is both sides of my family. My dad's parents taught him one thing: his indigeneity should be hidden and it should not be celebrated. Over the years, my father grew up feeling increasingly disconnected from his family due to the forces of intergenerational trauma, and he developed a quandary of identity, which is all too common among Indigenous people. And here I am, the wild man. Long before I ever considered who or what I was, growing up throughout the prairies, I was frequently mistaken for a person of mixed Asian and European ancestry. Sadly, the strong anti-Indigenous prejudice in the prairies made this a mixed blessing. That said, from an early age, my parents taught me and my siblings to celebrate who we are and fostered a sense of pride in our indigeneity. My parents also inculcated a deep connection to family, and as such, my immediate family became incredibly close, so close that we're often described as a wolf pack. What guided this connection? Kindness. My mom repeatedly told us that above all else, it was crucial that we should be kind. At the end of the day, we all knew that they would be proud of us, even if all we ever achieved was being kind. My parents also thought it was important for us to get an education. So here's my mom during her university days with a double gulp in her hands, the elixir of her scholarly achievements. She had four children at home, attended university full-time, and worked at least 2 part-time jobs, and we never went without her attention. She showed us that we could achieve anything that mattered in life. This is my mom's silver medallion, which she earned for graduating with the highest GPA in the University of Calgary's history department. The focus of her studies was on Indigenous peoples, and she went on to pursue a Master's of History shortly after being awarded this outstanding achievement. She told us one thing: if she could do it, she knew that we could do the same. The caveat, of course, was that we would need to remain deeply connected to each other, as the support of family is everything. In 2010, my family grew when I married my wife, Loshi, who would go on to support me throughout my education. This relationship was master planned by my mom, who went to great lengths to connect me with my wife, someone I'd known when I was a child. My mom could always sense remarkable kindness in people. When I returned to school, I knew I was going to achieve more than a bachelor's degree, and I knew I was going to contribute to the well-being of my people. Unfortunately, shortly after I commenced my degree, my mom was diagnosed with amyloidosis, a terminal disease. She pulled through, and she soon joined my sister and me for many of our courses, such as the anthropology of homelessness, in which we carried out a donation drive as a family for the local soup kitchen. The pursuit of education also led to a deep desire for me to reconnect to my Indigenous culture. And no matter which academic discipline I was engaged in, my locus was very much on the amelioration of Indigenous peoples. I was also deeply focused on what it meant to be an Indigenous person. When I had my daughter, Jacoba, I immediately knew one thing: I did not want her to suffer from the Indigenous quandary of identity that had already plagued multiple generations of my family. In my mind, any inhibitions this family had with respect to owning its indigeneity ended here. As such, upon convocation, I applied to the Peter A. Allard School of Law because my family and I decided that we could realize our goals of destroying the colonial project through the practice of law. I had my eyes set on Allard Law because of its specialization in Aboriginal law and because of the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic, where I knew that I could begin to give back to my community in a very real way. Throughout my mom's illness, we lived together, and I was a caregiver. And as her disease tormented us, we found that our connection continued to fortify. The depth of our connection, we learned, is infinite. With her in full remission, my parents pushed for me to move from the island to Vancouver so I could attend law school. We had dreams to achieve as a family. So I headed to Vancouver with my wife and daughter, and I got to work. Moving away from my family, even though there was only a short ferry ride between us, was so difficult. And although it was difficult, it was rewarding, and it wasn't long before I started to make real connections to the Indigenous community at Allard and beyond, and I soon realized that I was actually achieving my goals. My first day at Allard was the orientation for the Indigenous Legal Studies program, and it blew me away because it was the first time that I'd met a coterie of people just like me. Indigenous people, often suffering from the disconnection to their culture, who were focused on not only trying to claw it back, but to also ensure that the generations after us will be in a better position. During my second year, my mom's disease came back, and she told me that the most important thing I could do was to remain focused on my studies and to get my law degree no matter what. Sadly, a month before I was scheduled to begin my last year, she passed away. I stayed the course because I had to, because my mom had shown me that no matter what we faced, we could make our dreams come true as long as we did it together, and as long as I stayed connected to my family, anything is possible. I soon learned that the importance of connections transcends the family relationship when I started at the ICLC, where both Indigenous people and allies are connected in the goal of realizing the amelioration of Indigenous people. And when the pandemic hit, I saw that we also had an unwavering connection to our clients as our work continued. It showed me that what my mom said is true. If we remain connected, anything is possible. As I continue in my work at the ICLC, I take pride in what I'm doing for my people, and I continually think about how my grandparents' experiences at residential school and day school threatened to extinguish the connections to their family and their culture. And I look at my parents and my daughter, and I can see that the colonial project has ultimately failed. I see from my work and my life that this connection will never be severed, because I know that at the end of the day, this connection is ultimately driven by one thing: kindness. My mom's final wish was that if anyone could take one important piece of advice from her, it would be this: be kind. Through kindness, I have remained deeply connected to my mom, my family, and my people. Be kind.
Thank you, Jaden, for sharing your personal journey. Our third speaker is Vandana Sood. Vandana has been the supervising lawyer at the Rise Women's Legal Center and an adjunct professor at the Peter A. Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia. Since Rise opened its doors in May of 2016, Vandana has focused her legal career on working to achieve gender equality and empowerment for women. Prior to joining Rise, Vandana was a sole practitioner and practiced primarily in the areas of family law, child protection law, and immigration and refugee law, with a focus on assisting women who had experienced family violence. Please welcome Vandana.
I believe that I have the best job in the world. Seriously, I don't ever need to change jobs again. I get to teach law students, and I get to help women find their power because in addition to being a teacher, I'm also a lawyer. Before I went to law school and I was a lawyer and then a teacher, I was a scientist. I really love going to school. I have a master's in microbiology and infectious diseases. Sometimes I think that sounds more impressive than it really is. While I was in science, I was trying to figure out what I was passionate about. But it wasn't science. What I was passionate about was helping women like myself to feel secure, to be able to breathe, to be ambitious even, and to find their power. You see, as a woman of color, I know what it is like not to have power, or maybe to not know that I have power. I know what it is like to have people with power try to wield that over me. So after 10 years as a microbiologist, I decided to search for where I truly belonged. I took the plunge, I left biotech, and I went back to law school. Here, it felt for the very first time like I was inside the place where power is held. In first year law school, I found myself in a courtroom representing an elderly man with no home who had been charged with simple possession of a few rocks of crack cocaine. I sat in the wrong courtroom for 2 hours and I was so nervous I could barely breathe. But something in me quickened that day. After 2 years at a private law firm, I remembered why I had gone back to law school, which was to help women who look like me find their power. So I started my own law practice to help women with what is legally called family violence here in British Columbia. Violence from a family member is not just physical. Psychological violence counts too. For the first time, my work felt critical, but I couldn't help enough women. And I was working in a profession where until only very recently, the law did not even recognize the definition of family violence. I searched for community in the private family bar, but I didn't find it. So I reached out to anti-violence women's organizations, and then I also found lawyers who were working with family violence and helping women find their power. Here at last was my community. Through this community, I learned about a local student clinic being opened to help women with family law. Rise Women's Legal Center was opened as a partnership between the nonprofit West Coast Legal Education Action Fund and the Peter A. Allard School of Law here at UBC. I applied for and was offered the job of supervising lawyer. I was over the moon. On my first day, I realized I had an entire curriculum to plan and only 5 weeks before students arrived. It was definitely trial by fire, but it was exhilarating. My job was to balance a rich and experiential teaching experience for students with quality service to clients. But what I learned was that a rich and experiential teaching experience actually meant keeping a close eye over my students' wellness so they could fight for their clients. You see, helping women find their power through offering services in family law is, as my boss likes to say, like handing out Band-Aids in the emergency room. So I care for my students' wellness and I seek to inspire them so they can advocate for their clients. In spring of 2020, term number 12, we had just moved to a newly renovated office with warehouse ceilings and brick walls. Our students pictured here had just completed 3 weeks of orientation when we sent them home for the big move. But it was one thing to inspire students in person. Thursday, March 12th, we were in our spacious new boardroom teaching our students about anti-racism. I used my credentials as an ex-microbiologist to recommend frequent hand washing. The next day, the pandemic was declared, UBC went online, and I was teaching from home in my yoga pants. I spent the weekend transitioning our clinic online. RISE has many programs, and one of them is a virtual legal clinic, which offers services to women in remote communities online. So we were in as good a position as we could be to continue to teach as well as offer legal services online. But how was I going to know how my students were doing? I set up a daily Zoom check-in and had them come just for 10 minutes. I was worried that Zoom fatigue was already setting in, that they were exhausted and anxious and preoccupied with the pandemic. But I was surprised to find out that instead, they found the check-ins very helpful. They told me they felt isolated at home and that the check-ins were a daily touchstone for them. They looked forward to having someone to talk to, a place to come together with their community. The check-ins were originally meant to be a place where students could ask legal questions and talk about their cases. But instead, we often ended up talking about anxiety, worries about low productivity during the pandemic, stress about their academic grades, and a realization that we were all struggling in our own ways. Being witness to their transformation from anxious law student to courageous advocate has been an honor. I feel just as connected to those students whom I taught on screen as to those whom I have taught in person. The future is uncertain, but what we have is each other and our community.
Thank you, Vanjana. It was enlightening to learn about the important work you do and the strong connections you've been able to maintain with your students throughout the pandemic. Our next speaker is Cindy Sue. Now, Cindy began her career in New York in investment banking. She then transitioned to management consulting and developed corporate strategy for small and mid-sized consumer companies looking for rapid growth. She was an award-winning senior analyst at LivePerson and specialized in analysis and execution of pioneering projects. She's currently an advisor and producer at the AGP agency and has found success in developing new territories for pianist Adam Georgi's international concert tours. Under her leadership, Adam's global audience grew to include Vancouver, the UK, Taiwan, and China. Cindy also produces sold-out concerts at Carnegie Hall annually. An advocate and educator of classical music, Cindy is a regular speaker at conferences and on podcasts, a certified piano and flute performer with Canada's Royal Conservatory of Music. She also co-founded Piano House and C&D Studios. You enjoyed a small sample of Cindy's talent earlier in the program. She was the pianist behind the music that we played. Cindy joins us tonight from Budapest. Please welcome her.
I'd like to share with you how I connected my two passions. One of my passions is classical music, the other passion is finance. And life has a lot of complexities, but I try to summarize my career journey into 3 steps. Step 1 is to connect with your passion. Step 2 is to hone your skill set. And the last step is to dream goals that are so scary that it almost seems impossible. As far as I can remember, I've always loved the Disney movie Fantasia. The vibrant colors paired with the beautiful orchestra music. I was captivated at a very, very young age. And on the finance side, I've always loved numbers. And then to me, finance it's kind of like an elegant blend of numbers with business management. Passion will be your underlying driving force to excel at your craft. I started learning piano quite late at the age of 13. However, I practiced a lot, 5 hours a day, and was able to catch up to my peers and compete with them quite quickly. At the same time, I also aim high in all my mathematical courses and was art taught in my class. I also want to say that it's okay if you don't know what your dream job is, as long as you're working hard and be disciplined and aim to be the best, and don't let anyone discourage you. Sometimes your dream job can just materialize on its own, so just keep dreaming. I also want to say that the connection between you and your passion will influence other aspects of your life. A few periods of my life, I had to stop playing music because of my other commitments. However, I always find ways back into music whenever I can. And I did notice that whenever I go back to taking piano lessons and playing in an orchestra, my grades are always higher. As you practice a skill set, you will realize that there are ways to validate your knowledge, either through accreditation or through a particular job. When you're setting these goals, aim high and try to be the best. So for me, for my passion, the 2 goals I set for myself is to, 1, become an investment banker, and 2, to finish my Royal Conservative Music accreditations. So you can imagine how busy I was during my time at UBC. I embraced the challenge, but every day I saw there, whenever I had a break, I got to sneak into the music building just to get a few hours of practice on the piano. It was really stressful. However, whenever I look back to my student times, it's one of my happiest times. When setting your goals, be brave and be naive. Don't be the first person to cast doubts on what you want. Set an impossible and just figure out how to solve it afterwards. The world is big with lots of possibility. There's always a way. There'll be many people who tell you that you cannot and you're not capable. Be smart, but don't always listen to what they're saying. I was told by many industry experts in Vancouver that I don't have what it takes to be an investment banker. Luckily, I can see past the job market in Vancouver and realize there's a bigger market in the East Coast. So as a student, I decided to cast my net wider, and I recruited in Vancouver, Toronto, and also New York City. The story I would tell people that I did not get a single round of interviews in Vancouver. However, at the end of recruiting season, because I was networking in the East Coast, I landed a job as an investment banker in New York City, covering the exciting industry of consumer retail, with a focus on fashion. In 2015 was a year that I was able to bridge my 2 worlds of classical music and finance together. That was the year I volunteered at the New York Talent Agency for concert production in Vancouver, and I advised them to book the beautiful hall Chan Center. That at that time was a side project that I took on while working as a full-time as an investment banker. And when I joined the concert production team, my expectation was that I would just come in as a volunteer with doing a few admin tasks. But because of my experience as an investment banker and experience in business, my role quickly expanded to a lot of the responsibility, and I didn't know it then, but eventually for that production, I was actually the production lead. So after that, I spent 5 years working full-time in the business role as an investment banker and consultant, while working part-time in the music talent agency. It is not until 2017 that I decided to scale down on my business side and go full-time on the classical music production. Nowadays, I split my years into 4 quarters for traveling, and 1 quarter I'll be at home in New York City, 1 quarter in Taiwan, 1 quarter in Hungary. The last quarter, I'm usually on the road in whichever concert we're producing in Jordan, and usually per year I would travel around and work in around 12 countries, which is really exciting. So remember, connect with your passion, hone your skill set, and be naive and dream the impossible. And remember that the world is big. There's always a way to achieve what you want. And I kind of touched on all these points when I decided to start my own talent agency in Taiwan in 2018. That's the year that I want to connect my home country with the Western classical music culture. I am Taiwanese, so I want the community there to have more exposure to classical music. And by the time I started my talent agency, I've already had 5 years of experience producing international tours, so I was not afraid of what I'm about to do there. And also when I was there, despite town being a brand new market for our agency, I wanted to produce a concert in the Tainan Cultural Center. It was a hall where I grew up this next to and listening to, so I wanted to be there, even though nobody wanted me to produce there. Not my New York talent agency, not my musician, not even my family in Taiwan wants me to produce in that hall. But it took a lot of pitching and convincing on my part. I did make it happen. Not only did I actually make profit on the very first year of production in Taiwan, and every year I've been not only adding on new concert venue, but doubling profit ever since then. As well as I can visibly see the social impact I brought into the Tainan community. Many of the concert attendees are young students who had never been to a classical concert before. Some of them have since then been connected to their new passion and started taking piano lessons. And they've also competed in an international piano competition that I've also started a couple years ago. But that's another story altogether. So to summarize again, connect with your passion, hone your skill set, be naive and dream the impossible. And remember that the world is big, there's always a way to achieve what you want, and you never know where you will end up. So thank you for your time and keep dreaming.
Thank you, Cindy. My biggest takeaway from that is to always follow your passion as you have done. As is evident by your career, success is bound to follow if you pour your heart and soul into your work. Our fifth speaker is Brian Patterson. Brian graduated from the law school at UBC in 1995 at the age of 33. Since then, he's worked in the legal professions in Vancouver, Bermuda, London, England, and the Cayman Islands, where he is currently based. Early in his life, he experienced and overcame challenges with substance abuse, alcoholism, and depression. He has spent the past 30 years working on personal development alongside his law career, becoming certified as a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, and life coach, all of which help him to better manage his own life and to connect meaningfully with others. He has served as a mentor and on the boards of several nonprofits, primarily involved with guiding and funding substance abuse efforts in the community. He continues to explore health and wellness habits in all areas of his life, including physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and he loves sharing that with others. Joining us from the Cayman Islands, please welcome Brian.
My story is about moving from isolation to connection, from self-focus to other focus, from alcoholic to achiever. I grew up in Bermuda in a good home, swimming and boating with lots of friends. My youth was idyllic, but as I entered my teens, I realized I felt different from those around me, always comparing and coming up short. I attended a strict all-boys grammar school where I did well at academics and sports, but at 15 began to seek the solace of drink and drugs, and my grades and attitude dropped off. Despite that, I won a scholarship to the University of Waterloo in Ontario and promptly flunked out my first year because I chose to drink instead of study. I came back to Bermuda to work in the bars and nightclubs. My life became a blur of beer on the beach in the day, working and drinking rum in the clubs at night. I was with people all the time, partying hard, and still seemed to be doing well. But in the quiet times, I knew this was not the life I had planned for myself. By now, I was leaving the nightclub after work to go and smoke crack in dirt floor shacks until dawn. To say I was confused and lost and lonely was an understatement. I was chasing connection with drugs and alcohol and ending up disconnected. I was on the way down. Disconnection was destroying me. My isolation from the world was complete, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. I contemplated suicide several times between 22 and 24, just to escape the pain and anguish brought on by alcoholism and addiction. I hit bottom and sought help from AA. There, I found people that I could relate to and who had what I wanted. From other AA members in the 12 steps, I learned a different way of living. AA showed me how to become whole, by connecting with myself, with others, and with a higher power of my choosing. Dr. Carl Jung was an early influence on AA principles. He saw that alcoholics had a low-level spiritual thirst for wholeness of being, which they tried to quench with alcohol. He noted that condition could be overcome by a sudden psychic change or by a gradual spiritual awakening, coupled with an open and honest connection with others. He called this cure spiritus contra spiritum, which translates from the Latin as a spiritual experience to counter the addiction to spirits. So AA's 12 steps combine the best of medicine, therapy, and spirituality to where connection with others and a higher power is the key to recovery. I had to learn from scratch how to connect with others, how to be a member of a team, finally, how to find and relate to a higher power. As a result of my own spiritus contra spiritum experience, I stayed alive and began to grow up, learning to live and love all over again, this time without alcohol and drugs. Step 11 in AA calls for prayer and meditation. I had little experience of either. Fortunately, yoga had given me a broader view of a higher power, and I started meditating using the breathing techniques of Paramahansa Yogananda. I found this work to be intensely practical. I finally felt like I belonged. I applied to UBC Law at the age of 30. My terrible transcript from Waterloo was overcome, and I was accepted, although I was the first to get in with an undergrad in hotel management. Nonetheless, in my senior year, I was president of the Law Students Association. I articled in Vancouver and was called to the BC Bar in 1996. I returned to Bermuda to work as a corporate lawyer. My office was a mile from the crack house I used to visit and a few blocks from the police station where I spent many a drunken, disorderly evening. As a clean and sober lawyer, I could now help others by appearing with them in drug court or writing reference letters. Now that I was on track again, I began to expand my horizons. I trained as a yoga and meditation teacher and found that I loved contributing to the growth of others. I trained as a life coach and became certified to deliver several business and communication workshops, such as 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I continued to explore the boundaries of my own spiritual growth, from deep psychoanalysis to shamanic energy work. I sought out healers of all types. I have had experiences doing this kind of work that if someone else told me the same story, I would not believe them. Those stories are for another PechaKucha entirely. My search for connection included several week-long residential workshops where the use of experiential psychotherapy, meditation, and visualization created massive shifts in my ability to connect. It was after one such workshop that I could tell my mother that I loved her, something I could never do before. This new way of living, where I connect with myself, with others, and with God, this to me is wellness. I try daily to be the best I can be on that day, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this always involves connection. Without connection to myself, to you, and my higher power, I would not be here today. Vacations have similarly involved journeys of discovery for me. I love yoga retreats and scuba diving in remote places, traveling with or seeking out kindred spirits who share the same curiosity and open-minded approach. That is indeed my bald head in front of that giant Pacific manta. I have learned to reach out more than halfway every time, to realize there's a little bad in the best of us and a little good in the worst of us, and to take life one day at a time. My continued focus on connecting with myself, others, and a higher power keeps me right-sized and centered. I continue to work as a lawyer, practicing wellness in all aspects of my life. I keep in touch with my friends and family and have the opportunity to be of service in many ways with many people, from crack addicts to CEOs, from novices to experts, and from alcoholics to achievers. I have found that once we connect with ourselves, with others, and with a higher power, our inner light can shine, And if we have cracks to begin with, that light will shine all the more brightly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for that deeply personal and candid retelling of your journey. Our final speaker is my dear friend and former Sauder debate partner, Jess Tang. Now, Jess is a proud UBC Sauder alumna and a passionate mentor, coach, and community builder. In her role with SHAD Canada, a national nonprofit that runs an enrichment program for high-potential high school students, Jess travels across the country giving presentations to ensure deserving students do not miss out on what she knows to be a life-changing program. Every summer, she is the program director of SHAD UBC, where she helps students realize their capacity to create lasting legacies in their communities. She comes alive from the energy and magic of seeing youth show up courageously for themselves and others to build an inclusive community. Jess is also a TEDx speaker and lives to help individuals discover all that they can be and feel what it's like to have someone in their corner. Jess currently sits as the youngest member on the board of Wrestling Canada Loot, where she is committed to championing the growth of female participation at all levels of the sport. She's also a wrestling coach for an elite and competitive youth team, and when not on stage or on the wrestling mats, you'll find her at a CrossFit gym, playing guitar around a campfire, mentoring students over coffee, or rereading Harry Potter for the 17th time. Please welcome my friend, Jess.
I've had the privilege to speak in front of dozens of audiences across Canada, ranging from high school students to young professionals. And I get asked all the time whether or not I still get nervous before I step on stage in front of an audience and speak in public. And the answer unequivocally is always yes. I get nervous every single time, driven by that deep fear of being judged, which I'm sure we've all experienced. But one thing I've learned about public speaking and how to calm the nerves that come with it is to remind myself of this. Focus on connection, not performance. You see, performance says, how can I wow them with my content, my knowledge, and what can I do to impress them and be likable? It's a hustle to win others over. Performance says, we're different because I have or know something that you don't. Versus connection, which says, I am here willing to share myself with you in hopes that you can recognize your experience in my story. Connection is about allowing everyone in the room to feel and know that they matter and to be reminded that they matter because we were made to be real, not perfect. So connection then at the heart of it is allowing others to see you as you are in all your realness. Terrifying? Yes. Vulnerable? Absolutely. But it's also the access point to our most generous gift that we can give to others, which is our authenticity and our truth. Because if people can see themselves in your story, then they can connect with you. But it takes courage to be willing to own and share your story. It's in these moments that I had before I step on a stage with all my nerves and feelings of imposter syndrome, before any talk that I give, that I have to remind myself of this over and over again. It's about people. Connect to who they are as humans, not what they do. And so a strategy that I've developed to overcome a lot of my nerves before speaking in front of an audience is I make it a point to go into the audience to meet as many people as I possibly can, to have a moment where I can look them in the eyes and share a quick conversation, interact with them, to be able to say, hey, what brought you here and what's gotten you excited today? It's in these short moments and interactions that I can actually fact check my internal dialogue because I've been able to connect with them. And to fact check and know that people aren't waiting for you to impress them, they're simply waiting for you to contribute. And they're looking for an authentic experience of you, which will give them permission to also show up authentically. So authenticity then is what drives connection. So whether it's an audience of 100 or you're speaking to one other person, authenticity means letting go of the need to impress, perform, or perfect. And it means flipping the purpose of any presentation or conversation. Because you see, connection does not happen when we can make someone say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Rather, connection is what happens when we can make someone else say, oh, wow, I thought I was the only one. This is where true connection happens, when people feel valued, seen, and heard. And so that moment where you can share with one other person to really see them for who they are in all their realness, and then you can have that shared moment that says, wow, me too, is one of the most powerful and generous gifts that we can give to someone else. Me too says, I see you, I know the struggle, and you are not alone. My best friend Joel is one of the greatest listeners I know. And a number of years ago, I was struggling with a lot of fears of feelings of grief, anxiety, and a general sense of feeling really overwhelmed. And I remember hesitating to express what I was going through with him during a phone call when we were catching up. And eventually I finally did. And I held my breath waiting for his response. I braced myself for what I thought was going to be a series of advice, suggestions on what to do, or a series of, hey, look on the bright side, or at least it's not this type of response, which I knew would be tiring and exhausting to hear. Instead, he surprised me by saying, after a really long pause, wow, that sounds really hard. It was one of the most generous and impactful responses that he could have given me, and a powerful moment of connection. So often when someone is stuck in pain or hurting, we're scared to acknowledge or wrap words around or name what they're feeling. Instead, we rush to fix, change, or minimize their hurt by rushing to offer advice or solutions. But when we rush to fix and are afraid to acknowledge someone else's real emotions, we disconnect with them. When someone comes to you with their struggles or their problems, how easy it is and quick are we to figure out what should I say to make them feel better, or what piece of advice can I offer them? But how much harder is it for us to sit with them in their silence, to not rush to respond, and to instead to just let them be and to be with them, to do the hard work of staying curious and to practice taking their perspective, to allow them to feel seen, valued, and heard. Because rarely can a response make someone feel better. We can't actually make anyone feel anything. What we can do, though, is connect through empathy, and it's connection that heals. To be able to have the courage to say, yes, this does sound hard, and yes, this matters because you matter. I may not have experienced the same thing, but I know these emotions because I've experienced them too. And now more than ever, we're all experiencing moments of feeling stuck and feeling a little fragile. And what's going to bring us together and to allow us to move through these moments is not more advice, not more self-help books, or more podcasts, but it's actually the courage to reflect back to each other the truth within how we're feeling, and to make the hard choice to connect with the emotions underpinning our experiences, to identify and not be afraid to name and articulate our feelings. This is emotional literacy. If we can't name an emotion, we can't move through it. So connection then means listening, really genuinely, truly listening to understand, not to respond, and to have the courage to name our emotions and to communicate our understanding of them with others. It is a vulnerable choice because it's a choice to also recognize these emotions in ourselves and to connect with our own emotions in order to connect with others. So if we want to invite more moments of connection into our lives, if we want to show up for others in a way that is impactful, we must be willing to acknowledge and place words around our own feelings and emotional struggles. This is the basis of connection, empathy, and trust. And so connecting with others then, being able to hold space for someone to be valued, seen, and heard, and to hold space for them to show up as all that they are and to meet them where they're at, means that we also must be willing to lean in and be willing to allow ourselves to be seen, valued, and heard as all that we are. And to connect with others means first connecting with ourselves authentically and deeply, and to not be afraid to vocalize and wrap words around who we are as humans and acknowledge the shared emotional struggles that we all experience.
Thank you so much, Jess, and to all of our presenters. There's my video. Thank you so much, everyone. And I wanted to give Jess and all of our speakers a round of applause because it's the thing I miss most about real in-person events is the sound of thundering applause, which I know all of our speakers absolutely deserve. So thank you so much to everyone for their presentations, for their stories. I was getting teary-eyed at some points because we heard such personal accounts from each and every one of our speakers. So thank you. You will notice a bit of a costume change for I think all of us, but I hope that doesn't distract you too much. It's great to have you all with us, and I'm so excited to turn things over to you, our audience, as we move in to the Q&A portion of the evening. So we have about 30 minutes for our speakers to answer questions. They're all waving now. So we're going to try to go through them briskly. Speakers, some will be directed to you directly, some will be directed to all of you. If it's ever all of you, let's keep it, short, snappy, and brisk, because I want to hear from all of you and I want to get through all of these amazing questions. Remember, you can still submit questions at slido.com and enter the event code connections. So that's slido.com, event code connections. You can also vote for your favorite questions, so I know which ones to focus on. So I want to start with a question to all of our speakers. We'll start with Jess for this one. And again, let's keep it short and snappy so we can get through, because there's a lot of questions coming into Slido now. So Jess, starting with you, who is the most influential person in your life?
Thank you, and hello everyone. Absolutely, one of the most influential people in my life is my best friend Joel, who I talked about in my PechaKucha. And I think, there's so many reasons why he inspires me, but at the end of the day, he's a go-to person where he can really hold space to just listen. And I think that's a really rare quality in a person. And when I sit with him, or when we talk, he listens so generously. And if I hope everyone has that person for them that's in your corner, who unequivocally takes you as you are, and you don't have to explain things. And it's just so easy for someone to really see you in all your imperfections, and when you're at your highs and at your lows. And so for me, it's just my best friend, because he is so good at listening and doesn't rush to just fix things or like give advice or anything like that. It's really just, he'll take me at wherever I'm at, where I'm at.
Thank you, Jess. I think we'll go in maybe reverse order. So Brian, if you could go next.
Sure. Thank you very much. There have been so many influential people in my life over the years. Initially bad influences, and fortunately nowadays good influences. I've lived and moved and lived in a bunch of different places. So in each of those places, I have connected as much as possible and found amazing people to work with, to live with, to grow with. Although I do have a memory that I usually fall back on when I'm looking at that kind of perspective. There was a fellow who was in Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver for about 10 years while I was at law school and after. And this fellow was a older guy, silver-haired, so kind and gentle, but he took care of business. He was a senior person in one of the meetings, one of the groups that I was a part of. And he had this quiet kind of aura of gentle efficiency about him. You could not mess with him, but he would stop and listen to anything that you had to say. He was the best at what he did, at connecting. And I just had this image of him in my mind as I think about those kinds of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Cindy from Hungary, or in Hungary.
Yes, it's quite late here. So I think for me, the most influential person in my life is actually my grandmother. I was actually raised by my grandparents, not my parents, because my parents are quite busy. But my grandmother, she's kind of the embodiment of somebody that's not limited by her circumstance. She was not put through the education system, so she was actually illiterate. But being a housewife and being a mother of 3 wonderful children was not good enough for her. She actually started her own business while not being able to write numbers or write any words. But she actually started her own business in fashion retail and was able to grow her business to a big factory of 30 people. So, and she always tells me that there's no limit to what you can do. And her being able to achieve what she's done in her life without being put into the education system was definitely inspiration in my life.
Thanks, Cindy. Vandana.
Thanks, Frankie. I suppose if I look over the entire duration of my life and have to pick one person, it's kind of trite. I'm going to pick 2 people, my parents, for very different reasons. My father for pushing me, which maybe either was going against or, wanting him to prove what I was doing, or my mother who, is an amazing woman and has had an amazing life. So I'll just leave it there and say it's definitely my parents. Thank you.
Thanks, Vandana. Jaden, I think it's obvious through your presentation, but I'll ask you as well.
No, it's very obvious for me. That's completely honest. And, there's more than just my parents, in all honesty. For instance, I look to my siblings too. I mean, they're such an inspiration to me, whether it's my older sibling or one of my younger siblings. My sister, I totally intend to practice law with my sister. We envisioned going to law school together, and really doing this for the family and for the generations to come.
Thanks, Jaden. And Christina.
I mean, it's an unoriginal answer, but I'd have to say my parents as well, and my brother. So I guess my whole family. My parents, immigrants from China, definitely taught me the power of hard work, and they've always just been so supportive. Even when I had no direction, they were the ones who sat me down and were like, "Christina, what are you doing with your life?" Which is why I wrote my GMAT, MCAT, and LSAT all in one summer. My dad actually went to UBC, Allard School of Law, when he was 40 years old. So he's such an inspiration to me because he started his career quite late, but it just goes to show that put your mind to something and it's never too late to change career paths. And my mom grew up in Beijing. She lived through the Communist Revolution, was taken out of school, sent to the farmlands for 5 years, and she ended up putting herself through high school, went to one of the best universities in Beijing, and also went into the legal field. So she is like the definition of a badass bee. And I've been so fortunate to have that as my inspiration growing up. True feminist as well.
Thanks, Christina. I don't know what words we're allowed or not allowed to say,
Exactly.
but thank you. I think that was a good call. A badass bee. Okay, we're going to shift gears to questions for some of you specifically. Jaden, we'll start with you. One of the questions we received. Could you tell us more about how you maintain your connection to your indigeneity as a busy young professional while raising a daughter?
I'm lucky in that I've chosen this line of work. It's a natural segue to reconnect with my indigeneity. And, I did actually gravitate towards this kind of thing through my father, who actually specializes in indigenous banking, which was something that he was able to segue into from numerous years of banking beforehand. I saw that natural way for him to reconnect with his culture through that. And, that's very inspirational to see that, something that, being an indigenous person in that kind of work, usually that was a hindrance. And then to see how that evolved over the years and actually became a real asset, there's a lot of inspiration there, honestly.
Thank you, Jaden. Jess, we have one for you that I am personally super curious to hear your answer about, because in your presentation, you talk a lot about connecting with your audience. You talk a lot about the things you do before a live presentation, but now we're virtual, we're recording things, we're not seeing an audience, we're not talking to an audience. So what advice do you have for connecting with a virtual audience?
You're so right. And usually what gets me, that those nerves kind of erase as soon as I hit a stage after like the first couple seconds, because I can find there's always one person in an audience who is like really expressive and they'll like do this, and I just like zero in and look at them. But in this space, there was none of that. And so it was definitely really nerve-wracking in this specific kind of virtual environment where you couldn't see an audience. And I think for me, it always comes down to two things. Number one, go trust in your storytelling, to really understand that humans are hardwired for stories, and they're hardwired for really seeing, like, they will connect with you if you tell them a story. And so trust in your personal story. And like I said in my PechaKucha, if you can trust that, like, you have a story to tell that no one can tell better than you, and your stories and your feelings and your struggle through that is so valid, someone is going to connect with that, but they're not going to connect with content or information or flash. So stop trying to impress audiences and start just focusing on what is your story that you can tell that no one else can tell better than you. And trust in that, and trust in that that's going to resonate with someone, because someone needs to hear that.
Very nice. Thank you, Jess. I'm going to go to Vandana now. So Vandana, how are you building connections with your clients, many of whom are vulnerable and disenfranchised?
That's a really good question. I mean, at the student clinic, one of the things that we're trying to do, because we have a different cohort of students 3 times a year, is make sure that each student meets with each client at least once face-to-face over Zoom. So we're not doing everything over phone calls, and you can start off by building that, as we say, the relationship of trust. And then I believe that once we've closed their files, RISE as an organization keeps in touch with clients and kind of lets them know about our other programs. So it's certainly more challenging since we've gone online, but as people are getting more used to video conferencing, and for those of our clients who have access to that technology, that's what we've been trying to do. But if not, definitely at least picking up the phone and having a conversation.
Thank you, Vandana. And Cindy, we'll go to you next. So obviously you have big dreams, you have big passions, you've done a lot in very different fields. So what do you say to people who say you can't do this, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't have these huge, big dreams?
Usually when people say that to me, I will listen. Usually it's not a good time to kind of be in a meeting and actually go against them, because they will tell you 10 other reasons why you cannot make things up. For example, when my family in Taiwan tell me not to produce in the concert hall, I kind of just nod along and say, oh, I will think about it. I'll consider, basically be understanding and listen to their opinions, because they might actually bring up certain key points that you should consider. So take note of that, but don't try to change their mind. Just take note of it and try to solve and acknowledge all the difficulty they mentioned and try to solve it on your own. So basically be agreeable, but just in your heart know that you can still make things happen.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Brian, we'll go to you next. How do you suggest those struggling with addiction handle being disconnected from their regular support opportunities?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, and that's often where addiction and substance abuse has its origins is disconnection. And so through the pandemic, reaching out as much as possible in lockdown through phone, through text, obviously to be able to see someone and the audio and video at the same time. Zoom became a tool that I started using immediately, and just being able to connect like that, felt a bit weird at first, but like anything, you do it enough, you get good at it, and the practice has proven its value. Reaching out, not necessarily for my own self, but checking in on others, asking someone else. I always remember this friend of mine told me when I was sort of newly trying to figure out what the scoop was, I'd be standing by myself, and as a group happens like this event, and then people in the real world would go and separate and all get together and all stand together in their little cliques. And I remember saying to this one older fellow, how do I fit in? He said, well, you are standing by yourself. Go find someone else who's standing by themselves and talk to them. And all of a sudden, you're no longer by yourself. And when talking to someone else, that ask them about themselves. And the best sound, the most amazing sound in anybody's world is the sound of their own name. And so, using their name, communicating, connecting, that maintains that connection, without which we can tend to slip back. And that's very important not to do. So reaching out is always the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, Christina, that means you are next. We have a bit of reverse career paths, because you were doing like hosting as your side gig for so many years, and now you're at Slack. I was doing, debate as my main gig for 10 years, and now I'm pursuing hosting. So anyways, we can talk more about that later. But I guess the question is, as people with so many passions and so many dreams and such a wide variety of them, do you feel like Slack, is it the dream job? And if not, what is the dream? Have you achieved the dream, or what's next?
Yeah, and Frankie, I was also a debater in high school too. So yeah. No, totally. So I think one other piece of connection that I've sort of resonated with and thought about too is like connecting all of my different interests and hobbies and carving out a role for me that encompassed all of it. So I was interested in hosting and hosting events and hosting TV shows and that sort of thing. And public speaking was a huge passion of mine. And I was able to incorporate all of that into the role that I have now, which is I am hosting a lot of events, speaking at them, presenting, and still being customer facing, which I absolutely loved about my previous role at Slack as well. So I think one thing that I definitely learned throughout the years is how to just really thinking about what about each of my different hobbies I really, really cared about and was passionate about. What did I want to carry over into my career, and what was I okay with having as just a hobby? And then figuring out a role. So I would say, yeah, I didn't know this was my dream role because I didn't know it was a role, but it is now. I'm absolutely so happy. And it's definitely, it's because of the strong connection that I have with the company and the tool as well. We use it every day, that I'm able to be so passionate about it and be so happy every day at work.
Cool. Very, very helpful. Thank you, Christina. Okay, we're going to go back to a question for everyone. So I'll do a random order. But I want you guys to describe either your best or worst day during this pandemic. Describe your best or worst day during this pandemic. We'll start with Jaden.
Wow. So that's a very interesting question. I think I can give an answer to each part of that. We'll start with the good stuff. I was able to attend my first hearing, and I actually was successful in getting a settlement for one of my clients. This is someone who has suffered the perpetuation of colonization through his entire life, has been homeless, addicted. No one was looking out for this person. That he got into the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic. And this is a file that's going back probably 7 years, I think. It's touched the hands of multiple clinicians. I just happened to come onto this file at the time when we actually did get our hearing. So that was an amazing day for me. One of the harder parts of the pandemic is I actually contracted COVID, and that was a couple weeks ago. And, I'm very diligent about washing my hands, wearing a mask always. Like, it was a complete shock to me. It was a complete shock to everyone who knows me. So that was rough. I am definitely on the mend, feeling much better. My wife, unfortunately, got it 6 days after me. Hers was mild, which is very good. And I don't believe we transmitted it to anyone else, which is the really important thing. So it's a mixed bag.
Wow, yeah, that was very polarizing. I don't think the two extremes could have been more extreme, but congratulations on the case, and I'm glad that you're recovered from COVID. Vandana, how about you? Best or worst day?
So that's tricky to pick the best or the worst, but if I'm going to pick one of the worst, well, recently my husband, I had to drive him to emergency to get an appendectomy. And the pandemic part of that was I wasn't able to go into the hospital at all the entire time. So everything went fine, everything went smoothly, but it just kind of really brings home what we're dealing with here and how it impacts all of us in ways that we wouldn't have thought of before.
Absolutely. And again, recovery, everything's good, right? Yes. So that's what matters. But yeah, very, very important message. Brian, best or worst day?
Thank you. Probably best. I like to focus on the best. And there isn't necessarily a specific day, but a good day, the type of day that I really enjoy is, I wake up early, I'm rested, a bit of yoga and meditation. I play the sound of, there's monks chanting Om, and that's my sort of background music for the morning as I get ready, and put that on, get breakfast, have myself a protein smoothie. We were talking about that before, and then work, and then get good work done, because here in Cayman, they've been very strict. So I spent a lot of time in lockdown in my house, and not going very far. So moved my office here. And so here by myself. And so I have to put these routines in place. And when those routines all work out, and I work and I have lunch, go out on the porch, come back and do some more work, and then I exercise, either gym or yoga, and then I take time to connect with friends, and whether it's family in Bermuda or friends, and and then maybe watch something funny on TV before going to bed. And to me, that is like, and I can do that even though there's a pandemic, even though I'm locked down. It's an amazing day, and I can go to bed grateful for being alive and all of the stuff that's happened during that day.
Thank you, Brian. Cindy?
I think to start with my worst day of the year, I actually also got COVID and around New Year's in January. And this is before the news broke out about COVID. So I didn't know what I had. I just had a really bad cold. And there was a few days in there where I just thought, and I was alone in Hungary by myself, no family here. And there's a few days I thought, I think this is it. This is it for me. And that wasn't too nice. But thankfully I recovered, came back. What doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger. The cliche definitely felt like that. But I think just one of the best days I have in the year is actually the day I kind of realized that even though everything's on lockdown, there's no live concerts anywhere, but I suddenly realized that there's actually an opening of a lot of new opportunity in the music world. A lot of things are being done online now that not only basically can opens up our audience globally a lot more, because we can now host a concert, host an event that's open to everybody in the world. So the day I realized actually one of my best days, because I eventually found there we bounced up to doing online music festivals, and now we're gonna gear up to do an online piano competition, which actually makes a lot of things easier because we're not limited to the geographic location. We actually, because of COVID, open up to a bigger market. And also from the COVID, people are online a lot more. I was able to grow our social media profile a lot more because people are more active on social media. So I think that's my best, that realization that sure, the world kind of sucks right now, but if you don't think of it as the diminishing in the market is actually, we think of it as more of an opening a new way of enjoying music. That's a better mindset to have.
Absolutely. Finding the silver lining in all of this.
Yes.
Christina.
Yeah, I'll start with my worst day. I've been fortunate enough that I haven't, and no one I know has contracted COVID, so knock on wood. But I would say this was very recently. So Christmas is my favorite day of the year. It's my birthday. I'm like walking Christmas, and I start decorating my apartment and listening to Christmas music as soon as Thanksgiving is over, which in America, Americans don't agree with that, but that's okay. And there was about a day or two where, because of COVID and my visa, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to go home for Christmas. So it sounds trivial, but I was very upset and quickly ordered $200 worth of Christmas decorations on Amazon, and now they're out, but I am coming home. So that's great. I would say the best day is probably, I'm also, like, in case you couldn't tell, I'm sure you can, I'm a huge extrovert. I honestly, before COVID, before quarantine, I was rarely by myself, like at home, spending a night in. I was just always on the go, either doing work events or was traveling at least twice a month for work, which is always on the go. And I think one of the best nights was that first night where I finally felt happy and comfortable just being on my own at home. I played some piano, lit a candle, binge watched some Marvel movies, and felt like I was a different person. And then I would say a trip to Yosemite was sort of encapsulated all of that, where I was just, hiking in nature, just me and my best friend, and really just thinking about all the different changes that I've gone through during this lockdown. So it all spurred from that one day where I finally learned how to be alone, which was actually nice.
Very nice. Thank you, Christina. Jess.
The best day of the pandemic so far for me was the very last day of our SHAD program this past July. And so, as mentioned, I run every July a enrichment program that is a residential program where you take 60 high school students from all across Canada and place them to live on campus at UBC for 27 days straight. And so they're away from their hometown, living on campus, and every day we're doing workshops, lectures, labs, trying to build a very transformative experience and trying to build a tight-knit community with them. And many of our shads walk away from the experience saying, I've made lifelong friends. Oh my God, I've never had such deep connections. And they fly home, and then years later they say, yeah, I still keep in touch with my shad friends. This July, we moved everything online. And so students were at their homes from all across Canada, tuning in, every day to this online program that we were trying to run. And I remember being terrified, thinking, A, will these high school students even care? And B, can we build the same level of community and build lifelong friendships among these students in a virtual setting? And I was so incredibly impressed by the resilience of these youth and how hungry they genuinely were for a connection. I think I'm always terrified because high school students, they're so cool and I'm so not cool. And so I'm trying to be relatable to them and I'm trying to build this community for them. And what I've always learned about, connecting with youth and how do you build a transformational experience for them is number one, authenticity will breed more authenticity. So if you're real with them, they're going to want to connect to that and they're going to want to connect with each other. And number two, what I found was even though we were all virtual, they were still very much hungry for an opportunity to be who they are and be vulnerable. And they were willing to be vulnerable over Google Meets with us. And that was incredibly powerful. And finally, the last thing that I've learned about building that community is that youth love Shawn Mendes and I love Shawn Mendes. And so as long as you play Shawn Mendes, we're having a really great time. And so that was definitely a big learning, and I will always blast Shawn Mendes with high school students any day of the year.
I was nodding until the Shawn Mendes. I don't know. His Netflix documentary's out, his concert's out in a couple of hours. So if anyone else loves Shawn Mendes, go. It's on Netflix in 40 minutes, I think. I don't know. Or the documentary's already up. I don't want to hear about Shawn Mendes anymore.
It came out yesterday. It was amazing.
Okay, there you go. It came out yesterday.
For someone who's not a fan, Frankie.
Yeah, because my partner really enjoys Shawn Mendes. So I've heard enough about Shawn Mendes for the evening. Okay, last question. We'll make this one a zinger because we are coming to the end of the evening. So again, panelists, let's keep this one short if we can. We're all in quarantine. We're all, experiencing Zoom fatigue. So what's just a tip to either avoid Zoom fatigue or, just a tip you have for quarantine? We'll keep it general like that. We'll start with Vandana.
A tip for Zoom fatigue. What I've been doing at the clinic is suggesting that we turn off our videos because I never realized how tiring it is to stare at yourself as you're speaking all the time and how you're just kind of self-conscious and sounding in this certain way. So we turn off our video a lot. It's pretty funny because some of my students are like, but how do you speak to someone? I'm like, well, it's kind of like when we used to talk on the telephone. So that's how I work on Zoom fatigue. And as for quarantine, generally, winter was coming. Winter is here. It's kind of dark, kind of sucks. We're in lockdown again. So I decided to get some kittens, like 2 of them, and they're running all around the house. And so it's a really good distraction. I recommend it. Thanks.
Yeah, pet adoption went way up. And everyone just, make sure you keep your pets once quarantine ends. That's all I'm going to say. Keep your pets because they still need a home after quarantine. I know, Vandana, you will. But very, very good tip. Cindy.
What's Zoom fatigue?
Oh, I guess if I could define it, although I did not ask the question, Zoom fatigue is when you get sick of being on Zoom all the time.
Oh, I guess it's not Zoom specific, but actually, one thing I learned to do in quarantine is just to pick a new hobby. I obviously recommend learning a new instrument because not only it works your brain, it's also something you can share with your family. I personally pick a lot of really random hobbies, like I can solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded now. I'm learning a new language. And actually, I just found this new video that can learn a Morse code in 15 minutes. So just finding little new hobbies you can build onto your skill set that it's kind of a little bit funny that you can share with the rest of your family. So you can now have pictures and little videos sent to your family. That also kind of helped you socialize a bit more. I'm not sure if that's helping with Zoom fatigue, but that's actually new things I picked up in the quarantine time.
I mean, most people are like, I tried a new sandwich in quarantine, and Cindy's like, I'm solving Rubik's cubes with a blindfold. I mean, Cindy, just too
It's not, it's
impressive.
really not rocket science, not that hard. There's lots of YouTube videos that can teach you to learn those random things. So yeah.
Okay, well, while you're learning Morse code, Jess, what's yours?
I think for me, surviving quarantine has been really tough, and the daily reminder of like nothing is going to be more important than prioritizing my mental health. So taking that time to acknowledge that we're all struggling and we're all stuck right now, and sometimes it's okay to pause that break and just really be real about what you need in that moment. I think it's like really easy to be on the goal crush train, and definitely I've been victim to that of like, I just want to crush all the goals, 2020 goals, like new year, new me, who dis, like all of that. And then quarantine hit, and it's like, oh my God, I have so much free time. I need to learn a new language and use all this time to learn what a sourdough is and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you know what? I don't need to be doing all that. Yes, I have all this time on my hand, but also, yes, I'm gonna acknowledge that I'm really tired, and what I really need right now is just a phone call or some journaling time or some time to just move my body and get a workout in, because you're always one workout away from a better mood, and that's, at least that's what I think. So, or really just maybe what I really need right now is like to blast the Jonas Brothers or blast some Shawn Mendes, and to like honor that.
Great. No, excellent. I'm excited for your self-help book. I know that it will come out one day. Brian.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm with Jess. You know, fresh air and exercise, it changes my entire perspective of the world. I'll sit on my computer, you know, as a lawyer, I'm a corporate lawyer doing documents, and you know, like Christina, I'm outgoing. I like people. So quite why I'm looking at the computer for most of my day on documents, you know, I'm going to start merging and marrying my interests, as the rest of you have suggested. But all day on the computer, you know, my brain is just, it's sludge. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel fun. But if I go and do an hour of weights or an hour of yoga and get a bit of fresh air, it entirely changes my world. And I'm back to normal, and back to better than normal, back to being amazing and feeling amazing. And so I have to do that every day, especially when it's locked down like this. And then, as others said, reaching out and talk to friends before I go to bed. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Jaden.
Yeah, to keep it topical, I find that the absolute best thing for me is to call up my siblings or call up my dad. You know, reach out to your family. You're lucky to have them. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Jaden. And I guess our last question and answer goes to Christina.
Yeah, Zoom fatigue is real. When I first started doing our champion events for Slack, we were doing one a week and we had great participation, and slowly that started to dwindle because that's a lot of Zoom. And so I think it's just about being, getting feedback and giving feedback as to what you need and what you think whoever you're meeting with needs, saying, hey, does this actually need to be a Zoom meeting? Can we, I don't know, I'm not like trying to shamelessly plug Slack, but like, can we talk about it in Slack instead? Or can we email about it instead? Or use whatever tool you're using instead, just to save someone from that time. And if you absolutely do need to do it, like take it while you're going on a walk or something, while you're getting fresh air, if it's just like an internal team meeting or something like that. And I would say, yeah, when quarantine first started, I definitely fell down the pit of like, I need to learn how to cook everything on my own. And then I went into like eating a loaf of bread with myself every day. And then finally found a happy medium of like exercising and also allowing yourself to not necessarily be productive all the time. I think for me, I struggled with like, oh my gosh, I'm losing a year of my life. Everyone is doing like buying a house, getting married, all these things. But like, honestly, if you try to flip it and think about the positive, like this is probably the only time that you're going to have to sit at home and work on yourself and think and find new hobbies or whatever it is that you want to do. So try to turn it into a little bit of a positive, because I definitely went down the rabbit hole of it being negative. But yeah, that's definitely helped me. Oh, and binge watching all the Marvel movies in chronological order. Highly recommend. that got me through a solid 3 weeks of quarantine as well.
Very nice. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. This does unfortunately conclude our PechaKucha for the evening. Thank you so much to Cindy, Jaden, Christina, Vandana, Brian, and Jess. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for your answers. My script does not have a thank you for the organizers, which I'm very frustrated about. So I won't say their names because I don't have them all in front of me and I don't want to make a mistake. But to our amazing organizers, thank you so much. UBC Sauder and the Allard School of Law, we appreciate the work you put into this. So thank you so much. In the coming days, you'll be able to watch replays of the presentations online, somewhere online. I don't have the link. Maybe we can type it in the chat box. And if you have any feedback, please don't hesitate to contact us at alumni@sauder.ubc.ca. I'm Frankie Cena from Toronto. Thank you and good night.